All right, welcome. Pastor Patrick Walker here. We are in Hebrews chapter 12. It just so happens that this is where I'm, working my way in the New Testament through Hebrews in my daily Bible. Chapter 12 is amazing. Lots of great material. It starts off with an exhortation. Verse 1, let us throw off anything that hinders in this life and the sin that tries to entangle us. I think about vines, or hurdles, anything that's trying to hold us back. Throw it off, break loose. And it says, fix your eyes on Jesus. This is verse 2. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Now, verse 4, in your struggle against sin, remember, and he goes into verse 5 and 6, that the Lord, because he loves you, and he's a good father, he's going to discipline his children. So it says, verse 7, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. And he goes through this analogy. He says, what earthly father, if you truly love your son, you're going to discipline your son for their good. And this is now verse 10, God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So the purpose of discipline is to produce holiness and righteousness in us, is to develop character, is to develop the Christ-likeness in us. A father would discipline his son because you want that son to grow up to be a moral, godly, respectable man of integrity. A man who keeps his word, a man who is looked up to, is honored by others, respected by the community. So same thing for the Lord. He wants, and that ultimate individual is Jesus. The one who fulfills and checks all those boxes is Jesus. So he wants us to be just like Jesus. That's why he's disciplining us. So we see in verse 1 and 2, fix your eyes on Jesus, get rid of anything in your life that's holding this progress, this ultimate, one of the purposes that God has for his people on earth. The reason why he just doesn't take you to heaven, one of the purposes is that he wants you to grow like Jesus, grow into the image of Christ. He wants you to be a light to the world, salt to the wicked, to hold back the corruption of the wicked. But also one of the major purposes is to prepare yourself as a pure virgin for the upcoming wedding with Jesus Christ, who is called the groom for the church. So verse 4, when in our struggle with sin, when we give in to sin, what should we expect? Now, if we're not going to listen to verse 1 and 2, keep your eyes on Jesus, get rid of all sin in your life. Don't get entangled by sin. Throw off everything that's hindering you from running the race to be rewarded in God's eyes for doing what is right. Now, if we can't do that, and we are his children, then God's got to step in and he's got to help us. And that's why it progresses down into verse 4. It says, in your struggle, when you sin, what should you expect? If you're not going to be able to perform, and nobody can perfectly, verse 1, then God's going to step in and he's going to come with discipline. I wouldn't call it punishment. Perhaps part of discipline is rebuke at times, depending on a person's maturity, if they know better or not, But he says, what does this discipline look like? Verse 7, it's like hardship. All right. Verse 11, it's painful at times. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. But later on, you can look back and say, that's why my father did this. He was so tough on me because he knew that 20 years later, I was going to need this. I'm going to have to run my own family. And in running my own family, if he didn't develop these qualities in me back then, these skills in me back then how would I be successful today? So you push your children and it's painful. They complain. You've got to discipline them to keep them on the narrow path so they don't go off to the right or to the left into wickedness or evil or sin or, the flesh is very difficult to control. So for a little child, they can't do it. How does a father or a mother come alongside, discipline, and keep the flesh in check so that the child walks the straight and narrow path in life? God does the same thing. He allows different circumstances to take place in our life to discipline us, to convince us to give up our sin, convince us to do verse 1. If we're not willing to do verse 1 on our own, God will take the necessary steps through discipline to ensure that we do verse 1. And that is applying pressure and pain to get it to the point where we say, oh my gosh, okay, heck with it. I'm going to throw off this sin because it's not worth it. And I'm going to get rid of this hindrance and push past this hurdle. And I'm going to fix my eyes on Jesus and press closer to Jesus. So what might that look like in your life? I just want to challenge you today. What would the Father, a perfect Father in heaven who loves you, who sees everything, how could he be disciplining you? What might that discipline look like in this season? Are there a variety of methods that he uses? Perhaps he doesn't give you what you're asking for, what you want. Perhaps things are not going well in this area of your life because you're sinning in this other area, and he's bringing consequences. He's like, okay, fine. You're going to keep doing this. I'm going to close this door, and I'm not going to bless you in these areas until you fix this. That could be great discipline. That's an incentive. Like, I'm not going to give you guys dessert until your rooms are clean, Or if you're unwilling to go out and rake leaves and work hard and finish the task that I gave you, then here's the consequences. I'm just not going to bless you with movie and popcorn tonight, So sometimes it's withholding things. Sometimes it's allowing a painful experience or some sort of hardship. I remember there's been times, one time I talked back to my mom years ago, and like right after that, I suffered a physical injury. And the first thought I had was, you should, even though I felt I was right, and I felt like God said I was right, how I responded to my mother was disrespectful and dishonorable in the presence of other people. And God's like, that's what you get. Don't ever do that again. So he said, he even convinced me. I mean, he impressed upon me I was correct in the situation, in the confrontation. But the approach that I used, I dishonored my mother in the presence of others, and God disciplined me within the hour physically. And I still have a scar to this day on my hand because of it. And I'll never forget, because that scar is right there, why that scar is there, and to honor your father and mother because of that scar. So perhaps that's a great way to end this. Give this some consideration. How do you see the discipline of the Lord in your life as a loving father in this season? What has it looked like in the past seasons? And how is he strategically working to convince you to give up sin and that which is entangling and the hurdles, the pleasures, the worldliness of this life, to press through that toward holiness and righteousness, because that is obviously his ultimate objective here in verse 10 and 11. All right. Hope you are blessed. And until next time.